Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and this is Spotlight on the French Alps with Joanna Leggett, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier. I'm going to be talking to Joanna about how and where to buy, taking advantage of the many opportunities in the French Alps to buy your dream skiing base. In part two of the show, we'll be going over to France and we'll be talking to Heather Byrne, Regional Sales Manager for Leggett Immobilier, looking at some of the many French super ski resorts. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Well, look, Joanna, as somebody who many years ago had a ski chalet, I don't have one anymore, but one of the issues I always found when looking to buy was actually getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you want to see them in all the winter glory, but of course getting around is not that much fun actually in the winter, is it? But I see now we've got Ski Express going from St Pancras.
Yes, there is. There's a train Ski Express which goes from St Pancras and it goes all the way. It's a 9.5-hour journey. It runs on Fridays to Sundays, so it's great if you want to just go for the weekend or go for a week and come back the following Friday or Sunday. It's about 9.5 hours. It's got a cafe and a bar, no sleeping compartments on it though, and it runs sort of between December and April. So it's, and then from the station that it goes into in the Alps, there's buses that take you off to 12 different resorts. Yeah. So it makes it a much easier journey, and also it's quite nice to travel by train. Of course, there are still the flights, etc., that go into all over the Alps.
I did have a look at the website, and it actually looked very reasonably priced. I mean, there were some packages where you got the flight, you got your transfers the other end, you got your ski pass, and quite a few of them were just sort of slightly north of £1,000.
Yeah, which is great for a ski holiday. Yeah. And if you're looking to rent, obviously, a property in the Alps, then there's plenty of rental opportunities. The other thing, though, what you might not realise, that some resorts are actually more popular in the summer months. So it's an all-round opportunity if you're looking at buying in the Alps, because the summers are just as popular as the winter.
Well, I was just going to say to you, from a rental proposition point of view, you're obviously at peak money and peak occupancy over the Christmas period and probably leading up to Easter, I guess. What about the rest of the year? Would your income drop dramatically if you were to be buying it for rental?
No, not at all. In fact, the Alps, the French Alps, is probably one of the really good areas for investment because of its summer season. Because areas like Chamonix, for example, actually have more tourism in the summer months than they do in the winter. So you've got all year round rental opportunities. So whereas in other areas of France, say like the Dordogne or the Charente, where the season is from April to September, the Alps is all year round. So it's very, very good for investment. Obviously, Brexit has affected it now for British buyers, because you can only stay a maximum of 90 days without needing a visa. So if you were looking at spending, the whole winter season in the Alps, you would have to apply for a visa now if you wanted to do more than 3 months.
So is it 3 months in and you have to stay away for 3 months, or?
That's right. So you could do a month in, month out, month in, month out over a longer period of time. But if you wanted to stay for the whole of the season, say for more than 3 months, you would have to apply for a visa now.
Are you finding an adverse reaction to that from buyers, or?
We did initially, because it was, a lot of people do want to go for the whole season or the whole summer, particularly if they're semi-retired or they bought it to enjoy the whole of the winter season. However, in the beginning, obviously with the pandemic and COVID, the paperwork was getting, really behind, and obviously with Brexit, nobody really knew what they were doing. But now visas are coming quite, really quite simple, and they're coming through quite quickly. You just have to apply for a certain type of visa. If you're running a business in the Alps, for example, in the winter months, then you'd have to apply for a business type visa.
Would buying a property to let be classed as a business?
It can be, yes, but you'd need to speak to, there's about 9 or 10 different types of visas that you can apply for. So the best thing would be to go onto the government site and read up and see which is the right type of visa for you.
Okay, and can you apply online?
As far as I know, you need to go to the embassy, but I'm not 100% certain. So I would have a look online, and that will give you all the information.
I would guess if not now, it's going to get streamlined, isn't
Yes,
it?
I would
mean,
imagine so. Yeah,
I'm sure
I'm sure you can do it online. It's just I haven't gone through that myself yet.
I'm sure they'd want the tourist income as
Yeah,
much as much
yeah, exactly.
as much as anybody. Okay, so just moving on. Again, I mentioned the difficulty of viewing, especially in the wintertime with snow around in the Alps. Is it practical to perhaps go out and look at 2, 3, 4 resorts in the wintertime?
Yeah, you can, but you've just got to remember the distances in between, you know, for getting up one mountain and getting down another one. So it might be better to concentrate on one resort at a time.
Okay.
You know, like if you're going to the Three Valleys, do that in one viewing trip. Don't try and take in too many mountains or too much area, particularly in the winter months. I mean, obviously the Alps are used to clearing the snow, so the roads are always cleared and things. But if you have a heavy downpour, it can sort of heat things up a bit, I suppose.
That's right, yeah. Okay, and just going on to the buying process. I know, Joanna, you've been on our shows many times, and we've talked, I think, probably about all the aspects of buying in France and some of the difficulties and some of the shortcuts that you can take. And with the help of professionals like yourself, you can make it pretty streamlined. Is it the same buying process for a ski chalet, or is it a sort of peculiar market from that point of view?
No, not at all. I mean, the process in France is very, very simple. It would be exactly the same as if you were buying a chateau or a chalet or an apartment. All of you know, it's all pretty much the same. The only difference is if you're buying a plot of land, because you don't have the cooling off periods that you do when you're buying a property. So that would be different. In the Alps, obviously, there's quite a lot of new builds that are being built and are very, very popular. A lot of people look for new builds, but also the chalets and apartments, because there's so much variety. You know, you can go from something as little as a €70,000 studio in some resorts to, you know, 5-6 million in other resorts. But the process is you would go and visit the property, you'd make an offer, your agent would negotiate that offer for you, and then if it's accepted, then the diagnostics tests have to be taken. This is at the expense of the vendor, so the vendor pays for them. So it's a kind of a survey kind of thing that the French do. So they test for termites, electrics, lead paint, which can sometimes be in shutters and things like that. They check the septic tank, if it has a septic tank and it's not on mains drains, to see whether that conforms. And obviously termites. Very rare that we get termites as much these days as in the past. If once all of those tests have been done, and the DP, obviously the energy report, which would be quite important in the Alps with the cold weather. So once those tests have been completed, and they may have already been done, in which case you could possibly exchange contracts within a few days, depending on whether all the tests are back or in. At the moment, the market is very, very strong. There was about 1.2 million sales in France last year. So things that might have been on the market for a few weeks can actually sell in a few days.
Wow.
So, you know, make sure you're in a position when you go over to make your offer, because you will be able to sign that contract fairly quickly. In that contract, you have a 10-day cooling off period. So if you change your mind, or you go home and think, oh, you know, finances aren't quite what we thought, or for whatever reason, you can pull out within the 10 days. After the 10 days, the vendor's signed. The vendor can't pull out at all. They don't have any cooling off period. It's only the buyer. After the 10 days, you send your 10% deposit, which goes into the notaire's client holding account, and that stays with them until all the searches are done, until completion. And then you transfer over the rest of the money to the notaire just before completion.
Okay. Now look, as with everything, there's bad news. Paying for it. What are the funding opportunities in France? Or is it better to sort your funding out here and have it transferred?
Well, funding, I would definitely speak, if you're looking at getting a mortgage, because since Brexit, it's become a lot harder for us Brits to get mortgages in France. However, it can be done. The minimum value, I think, at the moment is around 150,000. It's 80% loan to value at the moment. The great thing about French mortgages, though, is they can be fixed for term. So at the moment, we've seen some people being getting mortgages 1.2% fixed for 20 years. You know, so the mortgage rates can be very,
I think we're going to do
good.
Do with a bit of that here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my advice would be to speak to a French mortgage company or a bank. Brokers, there's a lot of good brokers out there that will speak. You know, our broker that we work with particularly works with 13 banks, so he will find a product that's suitable for you. But I would find out whether you're entitled to a mortgage before you start looking, because there's nothing worse than presuming that you might be able to get a mortgage and then finding out that you can't.
I think one of the difficulties that happens to everybody who wants to try and get a mortgage in a different country is, of course, you've got slight difficulty in verifying your earnings and whether the French accept what we would accept as proof of earnings and vice versa.
It's much more difficult now for self-employed, much harder than it was before. It used to be quite simple. If you're salaried and you've got a good job and you've got a good income, then you're likely that you will get accepted. But I would definitely take advice from a mortgage broker beforehand.
Okay, and you just touched on the subject earlier, and that's the subject of energy and the costs, because it's pretty cold out there in the winter. What are the sort of regulations? What are the innovations making these developments green? These new build developments.
Well, there's actually 9 resorts, I believe, in France that have the Falcon Vert, which is the label because they're 100% recycled, renewed energy. So the French are very, very big on green and energy. And also, if you're buying a plot of land and wanting to build a property in the Alps or whatever, because we do sell land with CUs, which means outline planning, there are an awful lot of grants available for energy saving, you know, for solar panels, for energy saving heating, for all of those sorts of things. It's definitely worth talking to the government, because whether you're a resident or a non-resident, or, you know, a British person or a French person, there are grants available for environmentally friendly materials.
Heating and cooling is something we've just taken for granted over the years, aren't they? And I mean, now it's a huge issue. Okay, Joanna, as I said, in the second half of the show, we're going to be talking to Heather Byrne about specific resorts, and we'll be joining her via Zoom and actually visiting some of the resorts, I think, in terms of pictures.
She's an absolute expert, so you're definitely speaking to the right person there.
Good. Okay, well, that's all for this half of the show, so join us again for the second part of the show after the break. Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of Spotlight on the French Alps. Now, in the first half, as you know, we talked to Joanna Leggett, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier. And in the second half, we're zooming all the way over to the French resorts by the mountains. And we're going to be talking to Heather Byrne, regional manager for the Leggett Immobilier operation there. So welcome to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice to see you.
Good. Well, welcome. So, Heather, tell us where you're based now.
Yeah, so I live in the Trois Vallées, the Three Valleys, which is in the Northern Alps. It's one of the largest ski areas in the world. And I live in a small village here, just below all the massive ski resorts.
Right. Stop, you're making us all jealous.
That was the idea.
So your operation there, do you cover pretty well all those areas in your particular office?
Yeah, we do. We cover the Savoie, Haute-Savoie, Haute-Alps. When we're talking ski, those are the main ski areas in the whole of France. They hold some of the largest ski areas in the world, and are famous really throughout the world as well. So we cover them all, really. Okay.
Now, I read in the UK press that despite Brexit, despite all the economic crisis in the world, that the French resorts, particularly in terms of skiing, are doing very, very well, both in terms of sales and rental occupation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We've been very, very pleased and felt, you know, quite grateful actually that business has been so good. We've doubled our business in the last 2 years, and things have been really, really very exciting and very fast paced.
Well, I did say to you off camera that one of my happiest memories was having a chalet actually across the border from you in Switzerland. But I remember playing tennis in the summer, looking at Mont Blanc and feeling that this is the life. And The atmosphere was fantastic, the air was fantastic, the weather was fantastic. Are you seeing as much rental demand in the summer as actually in the winter?
Well, that's so interesting because actually summer activity in the Alps has developed a lot over the last few years and actually been really kicked into touch with the COVID because people have wanted to get out from the cities. They don't want to go to the traditional seaside resorts, which may be a little bit more packed together.
Yeah.
And they've been flocking to the mountains. So more and more, we're seeing summer activity coming right to the fore.
Now, just from a very practical point of view, from somebody wanting to buy for perhaps part use of their own, part rental investment in the French Alps. I mean, me for instance, I'm getting old now, so I don't really want to go skiing, but I love the location. Now, would I find it an irritation living in a ski resort? Would I have to ski, or can you find some peace and quiet in these lovely areas?
Well, you can. I mean, everywhere is different. That's the joy. There is just so much choice in the Alps that you can find somewhere to suit everybody. And if you want to be a little bit away from the resort, but still have good transport, i.e. perhaps a bus service, just for example, the Courchevel Valley, you can buy down in the small villages, but still have a bus service that in the winter runs through till 2 and is also running in the summer, although it's not quite as an extensive service. And then you have places over in Haute-Savoie where you can buy in a town like Saint-Gervais with all the restaurants and all the loveliness around it, but you're actually away from the skiing and all the sort of craziness around that, which some people really, really enjoy, and others want to step out of that a little bit like you. So there's so much choice. There's always something for everyone.
Well, just doing a little bit of research for the programme and for what I've had knowledge of before. I mean, I have to say that the French Alps do seem to offer great value for money compared with what is just over the border in Switzerland. I mean, there's quite a price differential, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I mean, Switzerland is a fabulously beautiful country, there's no doubt, but France is too, and prices are cheaper. And it's not just the purchase price, it's the after costs that generally are cheaper in France as well. So to that end, we actually have Swiss people buying over here, and some of them for permanent homes and some of them for second homes for skiing. So yeah, it is cheaper.
Well, just talking of those ongoing costs, I think one has to accept, I presume anyway, but do correct me if I'm wrong, the running costs of a property in a ski resort are going to be a little bit more because there's more community investment, isn't there? There's snow ploughs, there's this sort of thing, there's running of the ski lifts. So the service charges are going to be fractionally higher than a conventional sort of residential property, are they not?
That's a really interesting question. So yeah, it can be that way. For example, if you're in a co-proprietary, i.e. where you share costs with other people, you might all need to pay for snow clearance just of your driveway because the commune clean up the roads, of course. And we all know how well they do that. Also, you might find heating charges for communal areas are a little bit higher because more people are in and out. If you're in your own chalet, then again, you will be paying for snow clearing. However, things like heating costs, property here is built to such an incredibly high standard that probably heating costs aren't any worse than anywhere else. So yes, there is a small uplift, but it isn't too bad at all.
Um, I mean, are there any additional sort of local taxes to the local authorities or anything like that that one should cater for or budget for?
No, not at all. We pay taxe foncière, taxe d'habitation. That's changed a bit recently. So check that out with whoever you're buying through. They'll be able to give you the exact cost of what that will be. But it's very, very similar to UK charges. And so it's not really any huge surprise to anyone.
Well, we touched on the point that summer can be just as beautiful there as the winter time. I hate to use the word sort of average, but if one purchased an average 2-bedroom apartment, for, let's say, in a skiing area, if you were looking to use that for purely investment, what sort of rental level would you expect to achieve? What's the void rate? Let's put it that way.
Well, that's that again, another interesting question. That really depends on the resort. So, for example, if you go to some of the resorts that are very French orientated, slightly lower, shorter season, but very strongly used during the school holidays, you could probably expect a sort of 14-week rental period, okay, and perhaps a return of maybe 3-4%. In some of the really big resorts where you've got a huge influx of people, really snow short and a very long season, you can get right up to 6% return on your investment. But my advice is do the maths, talk to people, sort it out really carefully, because make sure that all your costs are involved, make sure that the people that you're going to be doing the renting through are able to sustain that level for you, unless of course you're doing it yourself. Most investors tend to get someone else to do it for them. And then you can be fairly sure of a good return, certainly better than most banks these days, that's for sure.
That's not hard. Actually, you just touched on a point I was going to raise with you next. In terms of the practicalities of renting, is it better to use a local agent that will communicate with you over here, or would you recommend a sort of an English-based agency that perhaps has good contacts over there? What are the practicalities of that?
Well, the practicalities are that if you've got a local agent very responsible for your property, they're much more likely to look after you in the event of a problem. Whereas someone in the UK is not able to run around helping you if necessary. So my advice would be go local, but do your research. There's a lot of different levels of standards, and it's really good to talk to people and find out previous experiences, as well as going to all the local agencies. Generally, the agent that you buy through will be able to make great recommendations, and I would definitely listen to their advice, but also seek other opinions as well.
And you're probably well aware, in the UK, if you were letting out an apartment, you'd probably typically pay a 10% letting fee, in addition a 5% management fee, totaling 15% plus whatever tax is. Would that stand up over there?
Yeah, it often goes up as high as 25%, maybe even more in areas where you are, really high end. But the level of return that you can expect, it really is quite something. The prices you can command in peak weeks, of course, again, it varies, so it's hard to give you an example, but you can command quite a good return. So actually putting that investment in, and you also get within that all sorts of services that are involving snow, like snow clearing and so forth. So that's all done for you.
Yes, and actually, I suppose if you can achieve something like a 3 or 4% return for a 14-week occupation period, I mean, that's actually quite a high return, isn't it?
Well, it is. And it generally, if you've picked yourself a good agency to sort your rentals out, then it is very much a hands-off investment, and one that you can, leave without too much worry. The rental agencies tend to be pretty good in resort because again, of the extreme weathers and temperatures, they have to be on the ball and paying attention.
Yes, and I suppose therefore it's fairly easy to get sort of laundry done and the preparation for a new tenant coming in. I suppose all that's part of it, isn't it?
It's all part of it. There's a lot of work involved. And also particularly the fact that there are just huge numbers going in and out each weekend. And they have teams of cleaners going through all the chalets and apartments. It's a massive operation. So really, I'd say worth the money.
It'd be well worth staying over here and leaving it to them, those who are professionals, I think. I don't think I'd like that job at all. Okay, now just finally, coming to again the practicalities of buying and taking up occupation of one of these properties and indeed renting it out. What are the current sort of visa/occupation period restrictions at the moment? I know it changed after Brexit, and there was a little bit of confusion in France, wasn't there, about the paperwork and how quickly it was being taken up, but I think it's all settled down now, has it not?
Yeah, it has. People are used to it now already. And at first, the 90 days restriction felt huge, but actually that is an awful lot of time, and probably more than most people come anyway. People felt like they were just having their choices taken away from them, but most people have found it hasn't made any difference to them whatsoever. There is also the option that once you own a property in France, that you can apply for a carte de séjour, which is a permit of residency. And that gives you the right to spend time in your property for longer than 90 days. Not for the rest of Europe, that remains the same. But in France, you can stay for longer.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, look, Heather Byrne, Regional Manager for Leggett Immobilier, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's been really great. That's all from us from Property TV, Spotlight on the French Alps. Look forward to seeing you next time on our next Spotlight programme.